I can't hold back any longer. The time has come to enter the mosh pit and talk about Amazon's The Rings of Power, the billion-dollar Goliath that was meant to carry us into the heights of Elysium and save television. Fortunately for a legion of YouTube reviewers, the show has turned out to be a total dumpster fire, kind of like a train wreck you can't take your eyes off of, and you have to go home and tell people, hey, did you see that? Did you see what happened? Before I begin, I want to let you viewers know my opinion on the internet culture wars that are boiling even as we speak. What I think is pretty simple. I do not care what race or gender your actors are. All that ultimately matters is the show is good. That's it. I do not care if every member of your cast is a trans-dimensional, disabled Mongolian little person. Is your show or movie involving, enthralling, magical, interesting, entertaining? Is it moving you with laughter or tears or both? Then in the end, no one cares. No one remembers that the Targaryens were black. If the show is good, then you can go to your deathbed with pride, knowing you created something that's going to live forever in our cultural zeitgeist. If the show is bad, well, do you guys remember Obi-Wan? You know, the streaming event of the decade came out like a month ago. Yeah, I don't either. I don't think anybody's race on that cast mattered in terms of that show being bad. Nothing could have saved it. I'll certainly talk more about this stuff in another video. Given that I've missed reviewing the first 4 episodes, I'm going to give you kind of my play-by-play take on the series as we go along. I should also note that I do not really give a shit if the series completely rips apart the lore that Tolkien has set out. I think we all know that it's already done that, but kind of in following with my previous statement, if Tolkien's characters and history need to be burned alive on the altar of entertainment for entertainment's sake, I'm okay with that. If it's a great show, then all we will remember is how awesome and great it was. I don't hear anybody complaining about Peter Jackson taking Tom Bombadil out of The Lord of the Rings, or The Scouring of the Shire for that matter, despite it being one of the better parts of the book. And yes, for the street cred, I have seen the extended editions 10 times over. I've read both The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings several times now. My father read it to me when I was like a young, wide-eyed kid, and truthfully, it probably fucked me up and made me the daydreaming nerd that I've become. I attempted to read the Silmarillion at least twice now, but I've reached the point in my life where I don't really blame myself for not being able to plow through that dense encyclopedia. For you Tolkien scholars out there, sorry, but anybody who can actually sit through that book has clearly transcended to the next multiverse, and I am just not ready yet. So, episode 5 is here. We open up on one of the better parts of the series, the Harfoots and Gandalf. Sadly, totally absent from last episode. Gandalf has magically developed the ability to speak and understand basic English now, despite the fact that when we last saw him, he could not even conceptualize what fire was, something that even the most basic mammals can do. Even more impressive is that he is able to understand a heavy Irish accent, something that many intelligent humans can't do. I call him Gandalf because when he first plummeted to Earth in Episode 1, it made perfect narrative sense to me. Saruman constantly rags on Gandalf that he's unnaturally obsessed with Hobbit lore and that their pipeweed has addled his brain. Even Gandalf talks about it. And also, quite frankly, in Episode 1, before we really got a good look at him, I was really hoping for some hot Maiar on Hobbit action, which would have been deliciously transgressive. Let's all be honest here. Who doesn't want to see the forbidden relationship of a young wide-eyed hobbit and an all-knowing angel getting to explore their bodies together and find love? Overcoming their proportion differences alone would make for brave and progressive television. Sadly, in the next episode, the more you look at him, the more you realize, yeah, he's just a bit too old for her, and that's probably not going to be in the cards. What he really needed was the Jude Law, Dumbledore, Gandalf treatment. So she tells him the world is a dangerous place, and he looks at her in shock, probably because he's still having trouble getting past that Irish accent, and they continue on their journey. It's, of course, all undeniably picturesque and beautiful, the one and only thing all the positive reviews are able to talk about because there's not much else going on there. And I do not deny for a second that if you were to get really fucked up on shrooms, watching the landscapes in this show alone would be a religious experience. And man, these hobbits are going far. They practically traverse the entire World of Warcraft map. I said earlier that the Harfoots are one of the better parts of the show, and I mean it. Their outfits and village are very intricately designed and really express the layers of backstory the creators are trying to set up here and failed elsewhere. They are fun to be around, and also in particular, the scene where the village chief is reading from the Hobbit Bible about those left behind is not only great for immersion, but it also shows us how they've dealt with the dark realities of life as a tribe. I think whatever lone nut up in Amazon writer's room that managed to sneak this stuff in should be commended. And in the next scene, we meet the much anticipated evil person SAURON that we all saw in the trailers. My biggest issue here is the same one I have with Mr. Anti-Charisma himself, Arondir the Elf. I truly do not give a shit what color his skin is, but what really does break my immersion is that fucking haircut, okay? This is Lord of the Rings. I'm not sure where he found a Remington 4-blade head trimmer to get those perfect lines, or a wall socket to plug it into, or the fact that he's been in captivity for weeks and it's still the exact same length. I can't even hear his dialogue between his dry delivery and me pondering the mysteries of the universe that gives him hair unlike no one else on this Middle Earth. But he is alone no longer. This person also knows the secrets of the immersive medieval haircut. I'm refraining right now from giving SAURON pronouns, as they certainly look like they're an active Twitter user and I don't want to get canceled. And now we're back with Evil White Man number 2, that one, speaking as always in strange and vaguely apocalyptic terms, something that must make his fellow orcs' panties steam as much as his masochistic tendencies for torturing them. And then we flash over to, by far the worst part of the show, the anchor that is dragging the ship down, human land. Holy shit, where do I even begin with this? Every time one of these scenes pops up, I feel a need to fall asleep. No one in this entire storyline is even remotely interesting, and we do not care for any of them. I find it really ironic that I see a lot of other reviewers are demanding more action scenes and excitement out of this series, when you realize that this storyline has had nothing but action and sexual tension. And yet we don't care. I think it shows the power of good writing and characters. It's also quite strange to me that these human villages seem to be made up exclusively of ragged, creepy old people and a bunch of teenagers. Anyways, despite the fact that several hundred people made up of multiple villages have gathered in this keep, there is no single elected official among them, much less a natural leader, much less anybody who could lift 50 pounds or has taken a bath in the last year. But there is one, though. So our most definitely not a natural leader, Bronwyn, who I like to call the only human on Middle Earth who showers or wears makeup, decides to give an incredibly undeserved and uncharacteristic speech to everyone. She says, "We all need to stay and fight. Who's with me?" And they all slowly raise their hands up and say, hey, can you give us some food? Because we're all starving, and we know you were unwilling to endanger your son to go get some food, even though he also would have starved to death. And another one is like, hey, I heard that fighting against battle-hardened orc warriors to the death is better when we're not all weaponless peasants. Mr. Anti-Charisma Elf also chimes in, but as always, I couldn't hear anything he said. And then the greasiest and dirtiest patient in the old folks' home gets up and gives what so far is the best line in the series. He says, "You know what happened to our ancestors who didn't make a completely hopeless stand? They lived." And he Giga Chad struts out of the keep and takes probably the smart half with him. And now we are back in Numenor. Undoubtedly a pleasure to look at in every scene that takes place here, if only the plot could match the majesty of this beautiful island. Wannabe King Isildur is begging his dad Elendil, one of the better characters in this show I might mention, to take him on the Numenoreans' glorious expedition to Middle-earth, and Dad quite rightly gives some serious tough love, pointing out to his daydreaming son that he's done nothing to earn a spot on this adventure, much less earn anything in life. Credit where credit is due. I assume the same mysterious Samaritan who wrote the Hobbit bits had a hand in Elendil's dialogue because it hits pretty hard here. Sadly, as opposed to internalizing his failure and becoming a better man for it, Isildur slinks away, which hits me particularly hard because he encapsulates my whole life. But we just know instead of listening to anyone, he's going to come up with another cheap plan. That's what I would do, at least. Meanwhile, there is drama in the palace. People seem to be protesting their queen's decision to invade a country on the word of an outcast, crazy-eyed, rambling elf. Mommy Milker's Ayarian shows up, and it's not immediately clear why she's shouting to talk to ambitious Senator Man, because we don't really know anything about her so far in this 7-hour series. However, it soon becomes clear that she's against this course of action because, I don't know either. Maybe because she doesn't want her father to die, which is as good a reason as any. Anyway, she stops Senator's son, who then says Senator Man won't listen to him, and then the discount college grad writers Amazon hired really crank it up to 10 here, and she says with incredible dramatic force, "Then speak louder." And what she is really saying is, I want you to commit terrorism and treason. And believe me, I will talk more about this later. Then we're back with another one of the better characters, Halbrand, who's been busy being a badass and showing the guild he is indeed the best smith south of Westeros. Initially, I was skeptical about him being Sauron, but certainly every episode continually is dropping more and more subtle hints that this might be the case. He's summoned to the palace where we meet Galadriel. What can I say about her that hasn't already been said 1,000 times? Despite the fact she is supposed to be a 1,000-year-old elf, she shows all the emotional depth and comprehension of a 3-year-old child. She has no concept of diplomacy, and her ability to read and understand the situations that she's in borders on Gandalf level. She has no interest in teamwork or other people's opinions. She only wants what she wants. She is so dogshit that her own countrymen tried to banish her to the Netherrealm, and the writers of this show want us to be on her side. So in the throne room, Halbrand points to a map and he's like, yeah, I guess that's where the bad people are. And the queen looks at him suspiciously and says, well, I'm sure it'll become more clear when you land there. And he's like, what the fuck, I'm not going. I care as much about this as the people watching the show. And the queen turns to Galadriel and she says, not even this homeless guy we pulled out of the ocean with you will back you up. And she wisely decides to leave so they can work their shit out before she commits her nation to war. And quite frankly, I don't see why anyone wouldn't be on Halbrand's side here. On one hand, he could stay here and be a valuable member of this beautiful and advanced island society, raise a family, have friends and drinks, and die content that he made the world a better place. On the other hand, he could go to the Southlands and be king over ragged old peasants in a van down by the river. Seriously. And Galadriel's like, I'm so sorry I said that. Gotcha. Yeah, no, she immediately starts giving him shit despite the fact he owes her nothing. And thank God he rips off his king pendant or whatever that thing is and says, find another head to crown, psycho. Honestly, this series should just end right there, and we launch a spin-off series called Halbrand, Fat and Happy Making Swords in Paradise. Back to Hobbitland, and here is where the episode really starts dropping the ball for me. Up until now, I was always happy when the hobbits showed up. Not anymore. So the whole caravan reaches Duskwood, and the village chief's wife decides this is the perfect time for a shit test. So she says, hey, there's less mushrooms here than last year. Obviously, it's Gandalf's fault because he's weird. We need to kill him and their entire family. Take the wheels off their fucking cart and leave them here to die before one of us dies. And perfect logical sense. But let's be fair, this kind of thing does go down in tribal societies all the time. Kill them because voodoo. And the village chief is like, Jesus Christ, it's like I married Galadriel over here, and everyone goes off to look for more mushrooms. And wouldn't you know it, wolves. You just know somebody's going to be left behind now. But Big Daddy Gandalf saves the day with a Hulk ground pound. However, his body cannot withstand the strength of his own cyber implants, so he gets wounded. And the chief's wife is like, well, maybe I won't murder you all in cold blood now because you got rid of the wolves. And we are back to the way better than the Southlands Numenor, and the young men and women have come out in force for combat training. Galadriel is there, and she says, let's have a friendly bout. At the very least, this scene is not trying to be some epic moment with like misplaced, grandiose orchestral music. Oh, wait, it does have that. We can give Galadriel some points here for at least having character consistency. For the last 7 hours, this is the only time we have seen her smile outside of that bizarre and now legendary horse scene. She's a physical thrill seeker. Her life is completely defined by tracing adrenaline, blood, and action. If skydiving existed in Middle-earth, this whole show could have been avoided. So she nimbly dances around with all the young soldiers of Numenor with joy and, dare I say, a hint of sexual pleasure on her face. And now Senator's son is talking to Senator Guy, and he's like, hey, Dad, listen, war is bad. And his father sighs and shakes his head and says, you know nothing, Jon Snow, for like the 10th time in the series. And then Senator's son says, but Dad, you said the elves would take our jobs. And Dad sighs again and tells him that there is a fabulous and noble opportunity here to greatly increase the trade, power, and prestige of our country. And then those damn elves we haven't seen for 2,000 years will be working for us. And he also says we should never go against the tides or whatever random ocean metaphors Numenoreans are always using. Speaking of ocean lingo, something interesting to consider. The dream sequence of the queen is not the wild forces of nature demolishing her city, but it is the literal physical manifestation of their god, the ocean, pronouncing judgment. If anything, this does lead credence to her desperate course of action. There's also a quick scene here with the queen and the only old guy who got out of the Southlands, but nothing of any importance comes out of their mouth. And we're back with Gandalf and cutie Eleanor. And Gandalf has gone away by himself, away from everybody, and he's muttering subconscious magical chants to ice up his swollen arm. And then, in a display of genius that only Gandalf himself could rival, she grabs onto his clearly dangerous ice-covered arm. So let's set the stage here. In the hour we've spent on this story, she knows he's magical. She knows he's mysterious. She knows he can barely comprehend what he himself is doing. She screamed to the high hills, to the whole tribe, that it was her fate that they met. And I might also add that he saved her life like 3 minutes ago. But her arm got a little cold, so she's out of here, baby. Deal's off. Good luck. You're getting left behind. And oh my gosh, we're already back to the other half of this show, Elf and Dwarfland. All the stars have been gathered around the High King's table. We have Durin, by far one of the better characters in this show, along with all the other dwarves. I think it's because the writers were under the mistaken idea that dwarves are like funny, but really what they accidentally did is give them actual personalities. As opposed to the elves on this show, which I might now mention I absolutely despise. All of them. They're all irredeemable. Somebody in the writer's room has confused noble and otherworldly with insufferable, rude, dry, pompous, and boring. This is made even more compounded and awkward by the fact that the elves are closer to their otherworldly heaven on this show than they ever were in the books. They literally send members of their race into eternity when they tire of them. And yes, I absolutely pass all of this judgment onto Elrond, the supposed fan favorite. But before we get to him, to finish up with Durin, not only is he a pleasure to share screen time with, but serious props should be given to the actress who plays his wife, Disa, who steals every scene that she's in, including the one where not-so-great friend Elrond accuses her and her husband of being liars. She gives him a look that is so fucking scary, you fully believe she could rip his asshole out on the spot. It's legitimately the most tense and highest stakes scene on the show so far. Coming around the table, we also have evil white male number 5, the High King. What else could be said here besides a forgettable character that delivers lines every bit and vague as meaningless evil white male elf number 2? And yes, we have Elrond at the table. Elrond, the amazing friend. Elrond is the kind of friend who doesn't bother to call on you for 20 years. Elrond is the friend who responds to desperate frustration with your father with a long, drawn-out, and completely tone-deaf monologue about how awesome his own father was. He's the kind of friend who accuses your family of being liars in your own house, followed up by, "There's no secret worth concealing deception," which is the kind of level 9,000 dialogue that only the deepest of Mongolians can comprehend. He's the kind of friend that eavesdrops on your private conversations about stuff that's none of his business. The kind of friend that sneaks around your kingdom, breaking into areas he's clearly not supposed to go. He's the kind of friend that you make a blood oath with to the death, where, were he to break it, it would invite 1,000 years of war between elf and dwarf kind. And of course, he's the kind of friend who immediately breaks it. That's the kind of friend Elrond is, and for some reason the writers expect us to really like this guy. So they're having their nice little dinner. The High Elf King is being extremely rude, and Durin drops the second best line in the series so far, that elves take 20 years to take a shit. Personally, I would have said they take 20 years to finish most lines of dialogue. He finishes his complete alpha dominance by making up a lie that the table is sacred, so he scores himself the best elf IKEA in the land. And now we have Elrond talking with the High Elf King, and here's where I put the final nail in Elrond's coffin. Much like Galadriel, despite the fact he's 1,000 years old, the script conveniently allows him to be borderline retarded when it comes to being unaware of the inept manipulations of the king and his dad, Celebrimbor. That is what Elrond is for me. A character that is changed scene by scene to be whatever the script needs him to be. The only consistent character trait he shows is betrayal. So the king tells him a nice little fairy tale about Balrogs and elf warriors creating mithril under the ground with the sweat of their battling. And he says, "Hey, Elrond, did you find mithril while you were sneaking around your host kingdom?" And Elrond says, "I must not break my oath." And the king says, "Well, why would you say that if it wasn't true that you found mithril?" And Elrond's like, "I must not break my oath." And I completely agree with the king, and I was also incredulous that Elrond would say this, as even mentioning his oath is in a sense breaking it. But we don't need to worry about him potentially breaking his blood oath, because 3 minutes later he is definitely breaking his blood oath with his dad Celebrimbor, who is walking along nonchalantly saying, "Hey, Elrond, you know this mithril you gave me?" What the fuck, Elrond? And he says, "I think this mithril is going to save the elf race." Not that anyone or anything we've seen so far makes the elves worth saving. But don't worry, the best is yet to come. We pop over to big boy Isildur, who is now begging his friends to take him to Middle-earth, and he says, "Hey, I know I ruined both your lives and your futures like 2 days ago, but seriously, I really, really want to go too." And they say no, and he says, "But everybody deserves an 8th chance," and they smack him in the face, and they still say no. But we all know that Isildur is not going to let this deep platforming stand, so he slinks back into the shadows and tries to think up another con. And he thinks one up pretty fast, because in the next scene, he snuck onto a ship. So rather than doing any work or contribute to anything, this is his obviously last half-baked Hail Mary to leave Numenor and start a new life where no one knows he's a useless liar. I can at least understand this one. Isildur has been short-sighted from minute one, and it's not shocking that he could be incapable of foreseeing what will happen when he's inevitably discovered. Shaming and humiliating his father is a distant second when it comes to getting his way. I think he should fit right in with Galadriel. Oh, Lord. Lord, them rings. This next sequence is why I came here. This is why I can no longer stay silent. If it is possible for a show to jump the shark in its first season, this would be it. So, the senator's son, okay, he sneaks onto the same ship that Isildur did. He has decided, with zero forewarning or character development, to commit an act of treason and terrorism and blow up the ship out of nowhere. So I do see a lot of reviewers talking about how there's no way you could fit 100 people on these ships. I am not a master shipwright, and honestly, for me, it looks like you could easily stow 100 people on these ships, though 100 horses I'm a lot more dubious about. But that's not what's important. What is important is how insane this is. He is destroying, he's consciously sabotaging the height of the Numenoreans' military technology. A ship that took untold hundreds of thousands of man-hours and resources to build. And on top of that, were he discovered, it would ruin both his life and his father's career. This is the biggest thing that has happened on this show for 7 hours, and we have no explanation. Let's put this another way. Imagine it's World War II, and we're in the White House, and Senator Guy's dad is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and his son is that guy. And he's talking to his father, and he's like, hey, Dad, I met this girl, Arian, and I mean, have you seen her? Have you heard of her? Have you heard of Sauron? And Franklin D. looks at him, and he's like, I don't really know what you're talking about, but what is important, if we defeat the Japanese and the Germans, America will be the most powerful country in the world. I'm sure even you can see that. And the son goes away, and in the next scene, he's blowing up an aircraft carrier. Okay, let's go over the 5 total minutes of screen time we've had with each of these characters, okay? We have Arian. We know she's a nice girl who likes her family. We know she likes to stand in the background and watch events unfold in multiple scenes. We know that 4chan has been cooming over her for the better part of a month. And we know that she doesn't like war because reasons. And then we have the senator's son. We know he's kind of attractive and has some game. We know that on the political front, he knows nothing, Jon Snow. We know he's into Arian, and thus goes on 4chan. So that's what we have to work with. And he blows up the ship. Okay, so let me fix this for you, Amazon. All right? It's easy. I myself just need 5 minutes. All you have to do is make Elrond speak faster than Forrest Gump for a few episodes, and we can make room for it. Before all this happens, we're going to set a scene. It's a scene in a dark tavern in Numenor, and Arian is there. But it's not the Arian we know. This Arian has shades of gray. This Arian is cynical about life and about Numenor, and has a vicious streak of elf racism like all the other white Numenorean men. This Arian would do anything to protect her family, including manipulating an innocent man. And on the other side of the table, we have the poor senator's son, drawn into her web. This version is not a charming rich boy with some game. No, no, no. This version is crippled, unattractive, resentful. He can't even believe she's speaking to him. And Arian reaches across the table and softly caresses his hand, while looking at him with those dark, cat-like eyes. And she says, the kind of man I could be with, the kind of man I could open myself up to, is one who would do anything to stop this war from starting. And then we cut to Senator Sun's face, and we see his pain, his anguish of this choice that he must make between betraying his people and finally getting to know what a woman is. All those years looking out of his father's window while the other teenagers laughed and danced and made love, and he was trapped, rejected, discarded by the world. But his wait is over, and this is his opportunity to experience what all the normal people in the world take for granted: love. And then we see him on the ship, and before he puts his candle to the oil, he looks at the camera and he says, "A chance for me, the senator's son, to show his quality," as he lights the ship on fire. There you go. That's what you need, Amazon. Give me money, Jeff Bezos. Please let me save your show. And also consider this. How much better did those two characters just become? Like, please, media, have the balls to make non-white male characters evil. Have shades of gray. It empowers them, believe it or not. It takes them out of the cradle of innocent victims into the reality where you have to be capable of doing bad things to do good things. It makes them characters, not caricatures. Anyway, the senator's son does get caught, but thankfully it's by the only other scumbag in Numenor. So him and Isildur lie their way out of the situation in the spirit of mutual self-interest, and Big Daddy Elendil wisely shuts down the investigation because he can tell it's going to get sticky. And we're back to the throne room, and the senator comments, hey, maybe this is a bad idea when people are willing to destroy this city to not go to war. And Galadriel puts on her bitch face and says, shut up, you man thing. And suddenly she has the ability to covertly persuade people, so she oils up the Numenorean queen. Elves, whatever the script needs. Anyway, they end it by looking all nasty at each other, and the queen says, you better get that homeless guy on board quick, or I'm going back to my Palantir. So Galadriel goes to the forge and meets Halbrand, and it's dark, and they are deliciously alone. And she starts off by saying she's sorry. Whoa, I was blowing popcorn out of my mouth again. Like, Galadriel, are you really going to become an actual person now? The mystery hero must have broken into Amazon's writer's room again late at night. Since nobody bothered to review the scripts or inconsistencies, they never noticed the changes. And she doesn't stop there. She stands naked before him and bares her soul. Her soldiers mutinied against her. Her own king found her so insufferable, he banished her into eternity. She's laying it all out on the table. And he asks her, why? Why do you keep fighting? Why are you just the worst? And for a few seconds, we think that we might actually get an answer for this. We're so close, but nope, Uno reverse card. She doesn't really answer the question, but I guess she does convince him to be king of the dirty peasants once again. Also, am I the only one here who senses some sexual tension? I, for one, think they should have consummated it in the shadows of this romantic forge, because that at least would have been a decent reason for him to follow her across the world. Speaking of across the world and dirty peasants, the old Giga Chad has finally met up with Evil Elf number 2. He pledges his loyalty to what I guess he thinks is Sauron, but maybe he's not. There's a mystery afoot, but we don't have time for that mystery. Now is the time for the old Giga Chad to prove his loyalty by killing the only young and strong peasant in humanity. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, considering the old man clearly doesn't have much lead left in his pencil, but when has this evil elf ever done anything that made sense? And then back to the human keep, and they're talking about stuff, and no one cares, it's all completely forgettable. Even Bronwyn's son knows they're all gonna die. And then they find out the sword that he found is like special or something, but we don't get any answers because Amazon needs to drag this out for another 4 hours. And Bronwyn herself, despite the fact that her only other part in this episode is giving this grand speech to the villagers that we need to stay and fight, is now saying, yeah, this is stupid, we're all going to die. Great consistency. And then to cap off this episode, Elrond tells his friend Durin that, I broke my blood oath, and even though Durin swore on the lives of his fathers that he would kill all elves till his dying day for such an act, Durin's like, whatever, I knew you were a totally unredeemable liar, I forgive you, and Elrond is like, hey, we need to go get Mithril now, or all the elves are going to have to leave Middle-earth. What a tragedy that would be, by the way. And Durin's like, okay, well, we better go talk to Dad. And at last, yes, we're finally at the end. The Numenoreans are sailing off to Westeros. They got 2 boats down, 3 to go. Galadriel is there, and she's looking really snazzy in that armor. And you can see this smile on her face, as she thinks to herself, yes, finally, blood, combat. And of course, Isildur is there showing everyone that hard work and doing the right thing is for suckers. In the real world, you just need to lie your way to the top, which is as true a lesson as we're ever going to get out of this show, but I certainly don't think it's one that reflects what Tolkien wanted his world to be about. Anyway, see you guys next week, hopefully sooner. Peace.